he was such an attractive case for the purposes of this book, because here he is almost saint, right? He's Mahatma, the great soul. Really, he's a saintly figure. No matter how you look at it, he was revered in his lifetime as a saint. He has been ever since in kind of religious terms, as some kind of messianic form. And that's precisely why I went after him, because to find, failure, sometimes major failures in such a figure would be interesting. I mean, I'm not saying, not in a cheap journalistic way, I got you, but in a more human way, in a more profound way. It's he was one of the best. He went as far as anybody could go on the way to perfection. He did all he could. He was really an exceptional individual, and practiced, in his life what he preached and so on. He's such an incredible teacher and practitioner of virtue, and yet you see all that failure in different forms, personal and collective, and the failure that originates from his ideas, failure that he's guilty of, failure that he did not address and he should have. And it was kind of that gives you a sense of our humanity, because you wonder if such an individual cannot escape failure and remains, entangled in failure, what can we do? I mean, I would guess his story would teach us something important about perfection, and we need to be, to improve ourselves, to strive to be better human beings. But at the same time, we have to be realistic, and there's only that much that we can do, and there are limits. And of course, he performs in the chapter of political failure, and whatever happened to him personally is interesting, but even more interesting, more relevant is what he did practically in his public life, in his career. And that's even more interesting. For example, his attempt at an utopia, which came to null. I mean, it's a very interesting, it's sometimes juicy. It's such a spectacular failure, that ashram is because he wanted to experiment. What he wanted there was a kind of the future of India on a small scale, in view of kind of replicating and expanding it on a much larger scale. And if it failed on such a small scale, and we know it did because we have so many stories coming from people who live there with him, that should make us cautious when it comes to utopia in general. And that's why, on the other hand, in that same chapter, I discuss the French Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution and other forms of other utopian projects, which failed again because of our hubris, because we don't know. We tend to think that if we have the right idea, the right dreams, right, the right ideas, that's enough. All we have to do is just go on and put them into practice. But that can be disastrous if we are not careful, and if we don't pay attention to other things, like what my fellow human beings is doing. My attempt to put that into practice, doesn't that affect doesn't that affect negatively the people flesh and blood around me? So you have that situation in Soviet Russia, for example, where in the name of this perfect society, perfect, really wonderful society, millions of people were killed, millions of lives were destroyed, and large proportions of the population were shipped overnight to Siberia and destroyed and so on. So utopia is important. It's really one of the greatest topics we have in politics and in humanities and so on. But we have to approach it really carefully, because it can easily turn into its opposite. It can be a hell,